Thank you. John mentioned that we got to see Candace yesterday. We had an all-day staff retreat away from the church yesterday. Broke for lunch, went to a Chinese restaurant on Buford Highway, Canton House. 9 of us at a round table with a lazy Susan. The waitress came to take our order. I called Sharon Lim Harrell and handed the phone to the waitress. And soon, food just came from everywhere. It was just wonderful. We had a good time together. We're coming to the end of our study about Baptist history and heritage, and I've been setting up tonight throughout our weeks together. We've got a lot to cover, and you may have a lot of questions tonight. All right, Ron. Oh, here we go. All right, I'm working now. Quick recap. First night together, we did a rush through Baptist history, the Reformation, Baptists in Europe, got to Baptist in Atlanta and the formation of Second-Ponce. Talked about the second night, Baptist distinctives, the 4 fragile freedoms, is where we landed most of our conversation. And then last week we talked about, because Baptists had gotten to be such a broad group, and out of balance in some ways, it came to a split in the 1980s. We mentioned that far more churches in the Baptist tradition are of the more conservative, kind of Sandy Creek tradition, but the leadership, the institutional leadership, was all from the smaller kind of Charleston tradition, and it created an imbalance that led to the split of the convention in the 1980s, what some call the takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention and others call the conservative resurgence, depending on your perspective. So we get to tonight. As I said, last week we ended up our time talking about that split and how it came about, the diversity of the groups and the formation of CBF. And we looked last week at some of our sister churches in the tradition. All of these churches and many more represent CBF churches in Georgia. Jim and Becky, you might have to help me here. There are about 3,000 Baptist churches in Georgia. How many, 200 maybe, would have CBF in their budget? So it's a small percentage of the larger group of Baptist churches in the state. But you can see from this list, they represent the more educated tradition of Baptist, like we talked about the second night, and some of the most prominent churches, certainly in our state. Ooh, I don't know how that happened. We talked about last week that the convention, the fight for the convention was at its apex in the 1980s, and convention numbers had swollen to about 45,000 people. The takeover was pretty much complete by about 1990. And so what we're talking about tonight is what's happened since that conservative takeover of the convention happened about 1990. What have been the implications? It has not changed. The Southern Baptist Convention has been under increasingly more fundamentalist leadership as the years have gone by. A few reminders. Most Baptists of any of our churches don't know or care, right? So when you meet somebody that's a part of another Baptist church tradition, chances are they're wonderful people in wonderful churches. Not all of the churches on one side of this controversy or the other are bad or good. This isn't like an old Western where the people wear white hats or black hats, right? It's a mix of churches, a mix of people, and we cooperate with other Baptists and other Christians we don't fully agree with. We just entered into a relationship with the Catholic Church next door. And I have lunch scheduled right now with one of the more fundamentalist Christian pastors in the area, and we're going to lunch, and it'll be friendly. So we're not talking about good people and bad people. We also talked about that one way of describing this is it's two values that everybody values, but it's which one do you value more? That the Baptist tradition remained pure in its theological and doctrinal kind of stances and purity, or that the Baptist churches have more freedom. Everybody wants the Baptist tradition to kind of remain pure. Everybody wants to have freedom. But these two traditions put far more weight on one than the other. So, while I've said all these nice things about a lot of people, and the vast majority of folks are wonderful Christians trying to get up, go to church, and do good, there were some actors in this 1980 split who did some really bad things. And we've talked some about that already, my predecessor being fired while they changed the locks on his door and all of that. We hit quickly the Baptist Faith and Message, I think on night 2. But we're going to dive in a little more because it plays into what has happened in Baptist life since this takeover in the early 90s. It was written to kind of hold Baptists loosely together. Herschel Hobbs, the primary author of this in 1963, and he just took a stab with a committee of kind of what do most Baptists kind of adhere to. Never intended to be a creed of Baptists. Baptists are not a creedal people, but in these topics, what generally do Baptists believe? And it kind of held the test of time as a beautifully written document. In 2000, after this shift had taken place in Baptist life, the Baptist Faith and Message was rewritten. It was not wholly rewritten because most of the 1963 language was so beautiful and held the test of time and accurately represented, but there were some places that there were additions, subtractions, and every time there was an addition, subtraction to the Baptist Faith and Message, it was to make a point. It was to identify the change that had happened in Baptist life, the change in leadership, the change in direction, the change in values. I'm going to just talk about 2 of them tonight because they are the most central, I think, to our discussions, but there were changes in many sections that we talked about before. This one's a little bit thorny, you got to really hang with me on this one. This is not as simple as, it's not self-evident until you dig around a little bit. The 1963 version said about the Scriptures, it is the record of God's revelation. 2000 said it is God's revelation. The Bible, is the Bible the record of what God is doing in the world to reclaim the world through love? Or is the Bible the final source? It's said again in this other part I have in bold. In 1963, the document said that the Bible is the criterion by which we interpret the Bible is Jesus. So you've got the Bible. How do you make sense of that? Well, you read it through the lens of what you know about Jesus the Christ. And the revealed Christ becomes the way you interpret these ancient documents that span centuries. 2000, making the case that Scripture is a testimony to Christ, but Christ is not the lens. Another way of saying this is Jesus first and the Bible second in terms of our loyalties, or is the Bible first and Jesus second in terms of our loyalties? And the 1963 document was saying, no, the Bible's got to be interpreted through what we know about Jesus. In 2000, they were saying, no, we are requiring a much more literal interpretation. Because if you bring Jesus into it, I'm not being facetious, you open up too broad a space for interpretation. You can say, well, because of what I know about Jesus, I think this could mean X, Y, or Z. But if the Bible just says what it says, it can only mean that. Is this making sense? Okay. All right. Another insert.
That seems circular. That if what we know about the Bible is interpreted through the lens of Jesus, but we know Jesus because of the Bible, I understand also that there's personal revelation, as it were, or the movement of the Spirit, but there's a certain circularity to that argument.
Drew is absolutely right. It is somewhat circular because Jesus is revealed to us through the Bible. Right. Well, let me give an example before we move to this because it would be pertinent to this. In the days of Scripture, the position of women in the culture was subservient, secondary, not, in some cases, property. Jesus' relationship to women was scandalous. We spoke to a woman at a well in the middle of the daylight, forgave a woman who was accused of committing adultery, right? His position toward women was extraordinarily generous and a more liberating position. So, if the Bible is taller than Jesus, you have to interpret the Bible for what it says, not allowing for the context of the day. If Jesus is higher than the Bible, you interpret the Bible through what you know of Jesus' liberality toward women, for instance, right? So, one of the hot topics in 2000, when this was changed, was the position of women in ministry. First of all, if we went back a few years, the controversy and the scandal in Baptist life was whether or not women could be deacons. That was the whole uproar in Baptist life, and people were fighting about it and writing articles about it and all of that. By the way, Second-Ponce, you could almost trace this on any issue. Second-Ponce has always moved on the more progressive end of these issues, but without much ado. No fights, no articles in the Baptist paper, nobody. They just elected women deacons because they believed they could serve well and believed in that kind of interpretation and so forth. Well, by 2000, the issue was not women deacons, but women in ministry. Should women be allowed ordination? And obviously there was a debate within the more conservative part of the tradition about ordination, and where this landed was, while both men and women are gifted for service in the church, the office of pastor is limited to men as qualified by Scripture. That was an added response to the controversy of the day. Now, quick review. You remember that we talked about that the hallmark of Baptists are these four freedoms. That you have the freedom and responsibility to read Scripture, to go to God on your own. That each local congregation has the freedom and responsibility to guide its own business, to make its own decisions, and that no hierarchy in Baptist life can do that for us. No decision made by the Southern Baptist Convention can have impact on Second-Ponce if we don't want it to, right? So, after the Baptist faith and message was changed, the leadership in the power structures, the new leadership in Baptist life, used it to impose creed-like changes in the denomination. This is the first paragraph of an article that was written in Christianity Today in 2002. I'll read it because I know everybody can't see the font well. Southern Baptist conflict over the revised Baptist faith and message adopted in 2000 has gone global. Southern Baptists in Texas and career missionaries are among those expressing outrage about a letter that the International Mission Board President Jerry Rankin sent to overseas personnel. The January 31 letter asked that missionaries affirm the latest revision of the Baptist faith and message, the Southern Baptist Convention's statement of faith that outlines its beliefs and convictions regarding doctrinal, family, and church issues. So, for the first time, the Baptist faith and message became a standard, a litmus test for those employed by the Southern Baptist Convention. No longer did you have the freedom to choose which kind of interpretation you felt more convicted about. If you were going to stay employed by the Southern Baptist Convention, then you would adopt the 2000 Baptist faith and message. That was 2002. 2003, another article from Christianity Today. In May, the Southern Baptist International Mission Board fired 13 missionaries who refused to affirm the latest version of the Baptist faith and message. Trustees acted after a May 5 deadline expired. The missionaries had 16 months to consider signing the Baptist faith and message or resign. Didn't know Jim and Becky were going to be here tonight. Didn't ask them to, but will you hand them a microphone and say, would one of y'all say where you were, what you were doing, what was going on in your life in 2002 and 3?
We had actually left in '93.
Oh, okay.
So we left before this happened,
Okay.
knowing what was coming. Well, we were in administration in Europe, and had seen the direction, and they had already told us things that we would need to be doing, so we left.
So after the regime change had happened in the early 90s,
Yes.
you all saw where it was going and found shelter elsewhere.
Yes.
Well, there were earlier tests that were presented to certain field missionaries for allegiance and faithfulness. Some of them from board members of the International Mission Board, et cetera. And some of those tests were like, do you believe in inerrancy?
Right, we talked about that
Scriptures
some
and
last week.
things of
Yeah.
that nature. So there had been, and the key for us in that early exit was they were also applying this to national partners, international partners. Do the Polish Baptists believe this? Can we cooperate with them, or the French Baptists? And so when you see that it wasn't just the internal stuff then. It was broadening for the world, and it was disturbing to us. I mean, I won't speak for everybody else.
But you were able to get out earlier than than when this mandate happened. Thank you. When the CBF formed, did not form as a denomination. In fact, it's always kind of never really figured out. One of the phrases that gets thrown around is a Denama network of Baptists who are just trying. But some of the earliest offerings taken by CBF were to keep these missionaries on the field. It was they had just been they'd just been fired, and they were in France or Africa, or what, and so it was a way to divert giving to keep those missionaries and their families on the field. So let's talk some about this impact in Georgia as we're getting closer to Second-Ponce. We've already talked about it's a purity versus freedom kind of fight. And as a part of the tactics that Jim was talking about, Georgia Baptist employees were told that they could not join a church that supported the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. If the CBF was in the church budget, you couldn't be a member and an employee of the Georgia Baptist Convention. I'll tell one of those stories. That, by the way, that was never written in a handbook. That was told by supervisors to employees. Nathan Bird, my friend who was campus minister at the University of Georgia, received that mandate. You will leave. He was a member of Millage Avenue Baptist Church. Millage Avenue gave money to CBF. His boss told him, if you don't move your membership, you'll lose your job. He went home, told his wife. She said, I hope you find a nice church. The kids and I are here. And, and what he ended up doing was he found a really sweet Southern Baptist pastor out in the country who had a 8:30 service. And he took him to lunch and he explained what was going on. He said, I'd like to join your church and I'll be here at 8:30 for the service. And then I'm gonna drive across town, sit with my family at Millage Avenue where we've been raising our, so he did. He kept the letter of the law and figured it out. So talk a little bit about the leadership of the Georgia Baptist Convention across the ages too. So Dr. Jim Griffiths, first administrator I knew. He was there through the 1980s, and many of you knew him because he was a member of this congregation. The executive director of the Georgia Baptist Convention in that era when the Georgia Baptist Convention and Second-Ponce were more in alignment than they are now. Dr. White served a long time, and as you can see through the dates, he served across that transition. And we'll call it, in a positive light, he was very adaptable. He was able to make it work for himself in the early days when the Baptists were more representative of who we are, and when that shift changed, he was able to make that adjustment. He took me to lunch soon after I came to Second-Ponce, welcomed me. I had known him for years, welcomed me, and just asked me straight out, are you going to get them back, get that CBF stuff out of the budget and get them back over here where they belong? And I said, no. It was my commitment to the search committee that while my affections are with Cooperative Baptist, I'm not going to bring any agenda about that stuff. We have a way to do both, and I intend for us to continue to do both. I did address with him that day that I had, as a matter of conscience, a problem with the fact that we were sending that much money to the Georgia Baptist Convention and none of their employees were allowed to join our church. He told me that was not a written policy of the convention. I told him I knew it wasn't a written policy and I knew it was a policy. Before lunch was over, he did say, if somebody in Georgia Baptist life wants to join Second-Ponce, I won't stand in their way. I said, thank you. So, as I said, we had had a friendship before and that went fine. 2019, yeah. Mm-hmm.
To say 1993 to 2018?
I'm sorry, 93. Yeah, I got that
Because then
wrong.
you'd have two presidents at the same
Yeah,
time.
they were not serving at the same time. I got that wrong. Thank you. 1993. Right. Yeah, same organization, Georgia Baptist Convention Executive Directors. Dr. Hammond began in 2019. Thank you. Well, let me jump back to say, after I said the convention continued to get more and more stringent, and at some point started identifying churches that didn't meet the purity test and just told them they could not be a member of the Georgia Baptist Convention anymore. Oakhurst and Virginia Highland Baptists were dismissed in 1999 for policies and practices concerning homosexuality. I served as interim pastor of First Baptist Decatur before they called Julie Pennington Russell as pastor. When Julie came as senior pastor, the Georgia Baptist Convention kicked them out because that was in violation of the Baptist faith and message about women being senior pastors. I stopped at 2 just because I didn't want, but this went on and on. Churches identified as being out of step with the new alignment were kicked out of the Georgia Baptist Convention. Second-Ponce has, for all its history, had identifications with these local, state, and national entities. But I want to tell you the troubles that began for us that we did not initiate in these relationships. George, wouldn't you know it, it started with problems of the missions committee. It's all your fault. The missions committee was giving the local association $10,000 a year and just were asking questions each year as they would review what is this money doing? Help us understand what the money goes, how is our money being spent? And not getting answers to the questions. So they were ready to do away with this association, with the Atlanta Metro Association. They decided to move the giving from $10,000 to $9,000 to make a point. They brought this to me. I said, give it another year. They have just hired a new executive who started in September. Let's give him a year to see if he'll engage us, answer our questions, and so forth. So after he started in September of 18, the first quarter of 19, David Bunch and I took him to lunch, welcomed him to town, blessings on his new ministry, and I said to him, I said to him at that lunch, we've got a problem at Second-Ponce. We're not getting, and the missions committee wants to take you out of the budget, and I told him, no, show us some love, right? Show up, help me help you in this relationship. For none of 2019 did we hear from him any. He never came to worship. Right. Then it came time to apply for funds for the missions committee, and he requested $65,000. You remember what we had last year. As you might imagine, this didn't go over real well with the missions committee, who wanted to out them last year. So, so I get this memo from Heather Webb after they met. Let me read this to you. I'm going to just read one paragraph. The Missions Council continued to struggle with the Atlanta Metro Baptist Association. The Missions Council is interested in zeroing out our support for AMBA for 2020. I asked the group to let me take that proposal back to you for further input, because zeroing out the line item would essentially mean Second-Ponce was no longer a part of the local association, and they agreed to this. Additionally, I did not know if withdrawing from a local association would require a vote of the deacons or the whole church or whatever, so I wanted your input first. So I took this to the executive committee, explained all of what I've just explained to you. The executive committee said, yeah, we don't need to be sending them money anymore. So Jimmy Balcom, the guy I had taken to lunch before, I now took to lunch second time in March of 2020, and I hand-delivered this letter. I'll read it to you. Dear Dr. Balcom, I'm writing to inform you of Second-Ponce's decision to discontinue membership with the Atlanta Metro Baptist Association. Second-Ponce Baptist Church has enjoyed a long relationship with AMBA, and we've valued the partnership. Across the years, however, we have established relationships with many ministry partners who are also doing good work across our city. In an effort to focus our impact, we've made the difficult decision to support fewer ministry partners more significantly. This week, the Executive Committee of the Deacons voted to accept the recommendation of the Missions Committee that we reallocate the mission money away from AMBA toward mission partnerships where we have had more involvement. May God bless your continued efforts to reach our city for the cause of Christ. I gave him that letter in March the 3rd, and on March the 11th, the CDC declared a pandemic. So, let me go on to that. So keep in mind, we have just entered pandemic as we go to the next chapter in this story. I got a call from Dr. Hammond, the Georgia Baptist Convention executive. He wanted to take me to lunch, and honestly, I was naive. I thought, that's so nice. I haven't even met Dr. Hammond. That would be so great. I'd love to go to lunch. So we went to lunch, and he brought another high-level executive from the convention with him. He told me that leaving the association meant cutting ties with the Georgia Baptist Convention. And I said, that's not our intention at all. This is about no communication, no mission money. We don't want to leave the Georgia Baptist Convention. We've long been a part of the Georgia Baptist Convention. This is not our intention. He said, well, you're gone. Your disassociation with them has compromised your association with us. He said there are only two ways to be a member of the Georgia Baptist Convention, and one is to be a member of the local Baptist Association, and the second is an at-large membership. You can apply for at-large membership if you don't want to be a part of the association. And I said, I bet that would require signing the Baptist Faith and Message of 2000, wouldn't it? He said, mm-hmm. I said, we're not doing that. I made one more appeal. I went back, looked at the documents, read them more closely, and it said, this is what you need to do to become a member of the Georgia Baptist Convention. So I got back with Dr. Hammond. I said, I'm not trying to become a member. I am a member. So we don't need to become a member. Let's just leave it like it is, right? We're sending checks, you're cashing them. I don't need the trouble. Let's just. He said, no, you're gone. You're no longer a part of the. We got the GBC attorney involved and all that stuff. So they sent a letter to the Southern Baptist Convention saying we've been removed from their roles, so they asked the Southern Baptist Convention to remove us from theirs as well. We were taken off the Southern Baptist Convention website by all notice, by all indication. We were just gone from the Southern Baptist Convention. Well, this month, I made an inquiry to the Executive Committee of the Southern Baptist Convention and said, how did that happen? We didn't leave the Southern Baptist Convention. Explain the process. Turns out, whoever got that letter did exactly what was requested of them and took us off of everything. But they were not empowered to do that. We are still technically members of the Southern Baptist Convention. The only relationship that the woman I talked to at the executive committee, she said the only relationship she knows of in the country that is tied to another association is in Georgia. That anywhere else in the country, you can leave the association and still be in good standing with your state convention, but not in Georgia. But she said that has no impact on your relationship to the SBC. I'm running through this because I know you've got some questions, and Bill Gabbard will be mad at me. So I'm kind of, he's got to go practice a choir at 7. So let me tell you what happened after that. So all this is going on during COVID, right? You remember when that lunch was? So I said to the executive committee, I told the executive committee all along, here's what's going on. They said, this is a bigger discussion. This isn't something we ought to send in an email, right? Let's wait till we're reconvened as a church and have this conversation later. So we did. We waited till we got back together. We brought all of this information to the deacons, explained all of the stuff I've explained to you tonight, except without the cute pictures. And the deacons discussed this in an August meeting. They didn't take action in August, but had a robust discussion about all of this. And then in the September meeting, did take a vote about our denominational standing. The prelude to that motion, this is not in the motion, it was just descriptive. The prelude says, for the last 2 years, we have not been members of the Atlanta Metro Association or the Georgia Baptist Convention. Second-Ponce currently provides for members to designate their mission giving. That's how both of those have been getting funded. Remember 65-35? On your offering envelope, on your pledge envelope, you could say, I want my money to go to the SBC, the CBF, or split it 50-50. Our current practice is to allow for that. We've been giving significant money to organizations that do not recognize us as members or as ministry partners. This is not the motion either. These are just some clarifications before the motion came to the floor. In addition to the money we've been giving to the Georgia Baptist Convention, we have been giving some direct support to the Georgia Tech Campus Ministry, the Georgia State Campus Ministry, and the Georgia Baptist Children's Home. Nothing about this motion would change that direct support. I, for one, love what they do at the Georgia Baptist Children's Home. Also, and this is important, if anybody in this room or the church wanted to support the local association or the Georgia Baptist Convention or the SBC, and you wrote a check for $100 and put it in the offering plate and said, I want this to go to the Georgia Baptist Convention. Second-Ponce will send that check to the Georgia Baptist Convention. Anybody can still activate their conscience and make a move in that direction. It doesn't need a vote because we're already out. And that the church would be notified in 2 ways. I would teach on Baptist history and heritage in September and let you know. And then in the October Church and Conference, I will not do this big old presentation, but just kind of let the larger church know of our current status. So here, the executive committee of the deacons brought forth this motion. David Anderson brought this motion to the church, and it passed, or to the deacons, and it passed in September. I move that Second-Ponce Baptist Church no longer list options for mission giving as a part of the budget pledge process, and that the church's denominational mission support be sent to the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship and the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship of Georgia beginning January 1, 2023. The reason that begins January 1 is people have already designated their assignments for this year, and the church will continue to honor those designations through this year. But next year, the default changes and the system changes. That was a lot, huh? We'll have a little time for questions. Here's the summary, not on tonight, but just our whole big 4-week conversation. What kind of Baptist church is Second-Ponce? We're a Second-Ponce kind of Baptist church. Because remember, there's no body, there's no entity that can tell us what to do. The Southern Baptist Convention, the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, nobody. We are who we choose to be in the church and conference meetings. And our values, our direction, our priorities, none of that comes from Nashville or anywhere else. That happens in this room when we meet in church and conference meetings. Which, as we've said, is why Second-Ponce doesn't necessarily look like Aunt Edna's Baptist Church. Because Aunt Edna's church, they get together in their fellowship hall and they voted something completely different. And that's their Baptist prerogative. As we just said, we are exercising our local church autonomy to be the Baptist church we feel called to be in this context. But even though our primary denominational identification is CBF, they don't speak for us either. If CBF votes something in an annual meeting, so, I mean, they're our primary partner, but they're not pushing our buttons either. We do that in here, and we let them know what we did. They don't let us know what they did, right? Because we are the highest voice in Baptist life. The local church in its decision-making is the highest voice. And because we play by our rules and nobody else's, we're free to partner with any Baptist of any stripe, any other Christian churches, agencies, ministries that we feel advance our priorities and our mission and our calling on this corner. So, that was a lot, wasn't it? I left you 8 minutes to have some questions. What you got? Yeah,
Need to be a member of any partnership or any convention. Why can't we just exist by ourselves?
it's a great question.
I mean, what behooves us to belong to? Just because we have? That doesn't seem like a good enough reason to me.
It's not a good enough reason. The question is, why do we need to be a part of any larger Baptist group? Why don't we just be Second-Ponce? And the reason, currently and historically, is there are things we value that we can't do alone, like missions, right? We can't afford to fund a missionary like Janae Angel, who is one of our partners we're supporting in Antwerp. We can't add that to our church budget, but that we value missions. So we voluntarily put our money in with other Baptist churches so that that missionary support can happen. We also can't fund theological education. We can't start a seminary at Second-Ponce. But we value an educated clergy. We value what theological education does for the larger church life. So we give money to other entities so that our money collectively can come support theological education, and we can build the seminaries like McAfee and then educate folks like Allie who'll come back to us, and it's a part of that ongoing ecology. Yeah, we do give money directly to Mercer, yeah. And we could pick a missionary to, but there are a host of other, I identified two, but you remember Jim Smith did a wonderful email for us, a presentation that we put on the website about how to help Christians in Ukraine, right, through a CBF artery that got funds to Christians in Ukraine who were in. So there are systems at the CBF level that are multi-pronged and bigger than what we can do by ourselves, so we choose. Now, that's why we do. Church and conference could change it. I wouldn't support that, but out of our autonomy, the church and conference could decide to support nothing but us. But in my judgment, there would be limits. Other, Drew?
If during 2023, there is not a check written from Second-Ponce to the SBC, will that terminate our relationship and membership in the SBC?
Yes. The question is, if there was no money that went to the SBC in 2023, would we come off of their list? And the answer is yes. Which means I think we probably ought to have a subsequent conversation about do we want to send $250 a year so that relationship is maintained. There may be some merit to that because I'm so aware of the fact that all this is going on the website, but our health care and retirement benefits are tied into a Southern Baptist Convention entity, and so there may be some value in keeping some relationship there. That's a discussion we ought to have later. Jim?
Is now a member of a Baptist World Alliance. We were for years, but I don't know if that's continued.
Jim's asking if we have a current relationship with the Baptist World Alliance, and I don't know. We have not been active in BWA since I have been here, so I didn't inherit an active relationship. I didn't stop it. I didn't inherit an active relationship. But if we're continuing to send financial support to BWA, I don't know. But that's also another really wonderful partnership of Baptists who do good work. Others? Yes.
Pedophiles, there's some bad publicity with the Baptist. I hadn't read it all. Is this any of this happened in Georgia, or was this something that's happened in the Southern Baptist Convention that they had kind of whitewashed it and compared it to Catholic priest? You know, that all that's come out over the years, and they've.
This is a question about some recent news about sexual misconduct among Baptists and Baptist leaders. First of all, the reason that did hit the news is some of those allegations were to very high-profile conservative Baptists, pastors of megachurches, and denominational leaders were being accused, and that's why it made it to the headlines. I don't know enough to weigh in on any of that, but to say that. Well, that's part of it. There's also been allegations that came up from grassroots Baptist churches, and there's been some recognition that some of that was swept under the rug and not dealt with in a wholesome way. As I understand it, the Southern Baptist Convention is putting together some corrective policies around that. I think it would be misrepresenting to say that the SBC endorses or permits and the CBF doesn't, or any. They're bad actors in all parts of Baptist life and Christian life. But I applaud the SBC for putting some corrective measures in place. But part of the challenge here is the SBC's reach in policing it because of local church autonomy. Does that make sense? Right? So it's the church's job to police that, because the SBC can't tell the church. So that in some ways, the Southern Baptist Convention took a bad rap because they didn't have a whole lot of reach on that anyway. But I applaud all efforts to get rid of those kind of bad actors who are representing Christians and Baptists. One more, and then Bill just walked out on me. He's ready to go sing. So I'm going to take one more question, then you singing people can go. Anything else? Thank you. Thank you. This is, well, my intention is to be as transparent about what's going on in the kitchen as possible. I know you prefer just to live in the dining room and not the kitchen, but sometimes you need to know what's happening back there to be able to trust the leadership of the church. So it's an amazing feeling to be able to trust you all with all of this and know that you receive it with this much grace. So thank you. Go in peace. See you soon.